Hello, and welcome to another in Adirondack Wilderness Advocates series of videocasts on topics and issues of interest in the Adirondacks and people who love them. My name is Pete Nelson. I am the chair of AWA. I'm joined by Bill Ingersoll, who's the vice chair. And we have an excellent guest with us for this particular videocast. Philip Terrie is an Adirondack and environmental historian, professor emeritus of American Culture Studies, English, and Environmental Studies at Bowling Green State University. He is the author of 5 books on Adirondack history, including the widely read Contested Terrain. For nearly 60 years, Phil has had a growing relationship and, I think safe to say, a love affair with Adirondack wilderness. We are very honored to have him with us for this videocast. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much, Pete. That's a very kind introduction, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we're glad to have you a second time. We're here to talk about a mutual passion, which is wilderness. Has a broad, subjective, aesthetic idea. And it's hard to discuss in a 30-minute videocast in a significant way. That's why this is our second try. We recorded one and we weren't happy with it. I attempted to set some kind of structure for the discussion and ended up starting us off with kind of a dumb question. So this time I'm going to change it up and directly embrace the subjective and spiritual value of wilderness. You're working on a new book in which you reevaluate your relationship with wilderness. And you write in that book that you're especially interested in meaning. You stress meaning. So as a broad starting point, what do you mean by wilderness?
That's a good question, and I will try to answer it. I talk about meaning in the manuscript I'm working on in several ways. I'm trying to figure out the meaning of Article 14, Section 1 of the Constitution, which we're all familiar with and which protects the wilderness that we are so lucky to have in the Adirondacks. And throughout the project, I'm trying to figure out what wilderness means to me and what the word means. It's very hard to define. It is a subjective thing. It's often something that exists in the mind of the beholder. And that doesn't bother me. Administratively, it's very easy to say, well, it's this place on this map with these boundaries, and we permit these activities in there, and these other activities are forbidden. But that's not quite enough. That's not what you're looking for here. Wilderness to me is a specific kind of locale, a place, has to be place-oriented, that is largely uninterfered with by human activity. It's not absolutely virgin. We'd have to go to Venus to find that, or Jupiter. It is a place where natural processes can recover their natural relationship. It is mostly a place where we're not confronted with the noise, the bustle, the smells, the distractions of urban or even rural life. I know that that is not a complete definition, but that's a place where I start. It is a place where natural processes proceed on their own pace, where we're not taking nature and making it into something we want, where nature is doing its thing. The trees die, they fall down, and they decay. Floods happen. The snow falls, it melts, it washes down the mountain. We're not helping them along. We're not stopping them. We're not interfering with process. And I think process is a very important word here because it awakens us to the realities of ecological relationships. And that's something that the 20th century has contributed to our sense of wilderness and why it's good, that nature is an incredible, complicated, complex of energy flow, relationships, predation, all the things that are happening out there, many of which we have yet to identify. And these things in me generate a sense of awe. And that is ultimately what I'm looking for. And that's what I talk about when I say that it is a spiritual place. It's hard to explain. It's like a person who has got religion trying to explain it to me who doesn't have religion, and I don't get it. Wilderness is my religion. That and family love and friend love, I guess, are the things that I esteem more than anything else. It's where nature happens and I can watch it or can be aware of it. And even if I don't understand it, it fills me with awe.
Sure. And that's a beautiful description of the value of wilderness from my standpoint. And I have to say, although there are differences in different people and how they view wilderness, that's a common thread, the sense
Mhm.
of awe and the sense of being immersed in nature. So there's a lot of talk, and I know I'll come back to this in a bit. There's a lot of talk these days, as there has been for decades, about how to manage this wilderness. And I was just at a meeting today that probably bring up that was all about how to manage wilderness with a new technique called visitor use management, new set of tools. But there is a traditional view and a compelling view in a lot of ways that to manage wilderness pretty much just means leave it alone. And I heard that kind of thread in what you said, in the idea that we just let nature be nature.
Mhm.
From your standpoint, is that the right way to, is that a right track to manage wilderness, just to leave it be?
That is the starting point. I think that when we're talking about managing wilderness, what we're really thinking about is managing people. And I didn't make that up. I heard that from somebody in the DEC 30 or 40 years ago. And I share that perspective that wilderness, because wilderness is a projection of our needs and our values. And so we do have a responsibility to protect it. And largely, almost exclusively, what we're doing is protecting it from us. We could set it aside and say nobody can go in there, and that would be the absolute extreme end of the spectrum on protection. And obviously, well, maybe not obviously to everybody. I don't advocate that. I think it is a place where we can responsibly enjoy it and grow because of it. But we need to manage how many people are there and what they're doing and what kind of facilities we build for them. And ideally, none.
Sure. Bill, we let you jump in.
Yeah, you described wilderness as a place where we let processes happen. So that there's so one way to look at it is like the active disruption of nature. Going in with equipment to remove resources, to exploit resources and whatnot. But do you also lose sleep over the possibility of like a passive interruption? This is a possibility that we may be loving wilderness too much, that just by loving it too much, perhaps that in itself is preventing certain processes from occurring.
Sure. I think, Roderick Nash said 50 years ago, we might love our wilderness to death. What is that other than the crowds? There are too many boots on the ground, too many people at the campsites, too many people building fires, washing their dishes in the creek. If we control the number of people by one way or another, I don't have all the answers to that. I know there are people working on it right now, and I trust them to do the best they can. But those are the processes that we can manage. What's a lot harder to manage, of course, is pollution from Indiana, global climate change, invasive species. You name, there's a long list of threats that are currently disrupting the wilderness that we have, and to the extent that it will, we have to do the best we can.
I actually have a follow-up on that, because you talked about something that I think has a potential distinction and is related to what we talked about in our meeting today. So you talked about loving it to death could mean too many people washing their dishes in a stream or making fires. Certainly, there's been a lot of effort in the last 40 years, and even before that, to try to curtail those kinds of uses that are damaging. So no fires in the eastern high peaks. We want people to use leave no trace principles. We're educating them about how to not damage the wilderness that they're briefly inhabiting. There are regulations about the distance you need to be from a stream. All of that is important. The debate that went on today, which is certainly a thread that you all know, is about solitude. And I wonder if you might have a comment on how the preservation of solitude, or what we mean by solitude, plays into this question of loving the wilderness to death or not. If we have 400 people in a day going up Cascade, And if we say for the moment that the resource is being well enough protected by the stewards who take such good care of it and who educate, is that still loving the wilderness to death? Is that a problem of solitude, and how does that fit into the picture?
I would argue in that particular case that there's no wilderness to protect on that trail, and that therefore it's been sacrificed, and the people who are there for the scenery and the terrific view that you get from Cascade can go right ahead and enjoy it. I go to nature for different things. Sometimes I climb a mountain for the view because that's a great sense too. And last year I was up Ampersand and Snowy and Mount Adams, there was nobody there. It was great. Ampersand, there were probably 25 people up there, one of whom had a drone. And it made me very angry, but I didn't want to get into it. That's a violation of the law because that's in the High Peaks Wilderness area. So the solitude issue is necessary to me when I'm contemplating a venture into the wilderness, but I don't think I have any interest in guaranteeing solitude everywhere in the Adirondack Forest Reserve. I think there are places that crowds of people can gather because there are other attributes of those places and they have a right to be there.
Well, as a matter of fact, the State Land Master Plan agrees with you because it talks about wilderness in general, which pretty much is almost word for word the same as the 1964 Wilderness Act, but also talks about the High Peak Wilderness, and in both cases talks about outstanding opportunities for solitude. And in the case of the High Peaks, it even has language that says outstanding opportunities for solitude if you seek it. So
Sure.
I think folks anticipated what you're saying right here. I definitely want to turn this over to you, Bill, because I know you have strong and informed views about this yourself. Question or comment on solitude, because it's a huge debate right now. It's been in the media and people are really lathered up over.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Phil, that the solitude aspect is why I like wilderness. This past weekend, for instance, I had some family up on 4th of July. I had family up from Pennsylvania, and they aren't nearly as outdoorsy as I am, but they wanted to go for a hike. So I was pleased to take them someplace near North Creek, where it turned out that we weren't the only people on the trail, but we had this little mountain summit all to ourselves. And so it was a real nice experience for all of us. But the way I had this explained to me 20 years ago by a DEC forester was, and this was specifically about, he was using the Van Hovenberg Trail as an example. And I don't really want to dive too deep into High Peaks issues, but using an obvious example, the Van Hovenberg Trail, he was saying that yes, on this one corridor that's a few feet wide, you might have hundreds, if not thousands of people passing in and out on a given day. But it's, if you go 500 feet in either direction perpendicular to the trail, you might find a place where no one has stood in 50 plus years. Um, I mean, do you agree with that point of view, or?
I do, and I think that the Forest Reserve, which is what I spend 95% of my time when I'm looking for this sort of experience, has plenty of opportunities for that. And there's a lot more to the Forest Reserve than there is the High Peaks or the Eastern High Peaks. But you can find isolation, and nature is more than scenery. Scenery is great. I love a good view. We all started with the good views, probably. That's what hooked us. But I like to go to the wetlands. I like the swamps. I like the thick northern hardwood forest and just lie down in the leaves and look up at the canopy. Those are moving experiences. And I think the people that want them can find it. The problem here, or one problem, is that when we're looking for that sort of experience, we need a lot of space. You can concentrate a bunch of people on the top of Cascade, and they can all enjoy the view. And they can, in most cases, enjoy each other's company too, and talk to each other and meet new friends. And it's a great thing, especially for children, to be up there. But we need a place that's big enough that we can go out there and not hear anybody, which means it's more than 500 feet. And so the dilemma is, to what extent is a minority being given a lot of state domain to satisfy their interests. I think it's fair, and I think that we have all, as Robert Marshall pointed out succinctly many decades ago, we publicly support symphonies and community swimming pools and all kinds of other things that not everybody uses. And of course, there are many other attributes to what we're calling wilderness that serve all the state, carbon sink being a major one, and habitat diversity and all kinds of other things that benefit everyone, even if they don't see them. So I think that is a fair thing for us to ask for the state, for our polity to provide for the protection of these areas that we call wilderness.
And Marshall was pretty insistent that wilderness be big. Because I remember to paraphrase one of my favorite quotes. I don't have it exactly as he wrote it, but this is not far off the mark. He didn't want to stroll into a natural forest and squat. He wanted some 500-acre preserve. He wanted to be able to stretch his legs and wander for quite a bit. For him, the size mattered.
I think at one point he said it should be able to take up a 5-day backpack trip.
Yep. So today's meeting that I referred to was a meeting of the working group that's developing management strategies as part of the visitor use management pilot in the high peaks that the state's doing with a private contractor. I'm pretty concerned about it because at the moment they're looking to set management policy based on how crowded people feel on Cascade and Marcy. Those are the two things that they're measuring. And there's an implicit idea also of dispersal in there, which isn't necessarily the best thing. Like you said, it's a big place. And even in the high peaks, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to find the kind of solitude that I love. Because I have the same value that you two do. I really don't want to see anybody. In fact, more and more over time, I don't want to see anybody. And it's not a problem to do that. In fact, I did a through hike just a month ago through Indian Pass from Upper Works to Lodge and saw nobody. So it really is, there are concentrations for sure, but we have a lot more territory all over this park. And
Sure.
I think that the way that we protected it makes that work so well.
Yeah, and dispersal is a great idea. The execution is kind of muddy. You can say all you want, oh, don't go up Giant, go down to the Siamese Ponds. And most people are not going to bother to do that. Well, that's kind of flat down there. It doesn't look very interesting to me. And of course, Siamese Ponds was Paul Schaefer's favorite place in the Adirondacks.
Absolutely. So another question for you, just looking back, you've been coming to and loving this place since the 1960s. How are we doing? Is your sense of this wilderness so well? Is it holding its own? Has it improved, as I know it has in many places, or is the opportunity for the kinds of things we've been talking about reduced in some way? How do you see the 60-year evolution since you started coming here?
That's a big question and a good one. I see pluses and minuses. The total number of acreage protected, we're doing great. The steps toward expanding the publicly available protected open space is just monumental in that time. The land that the state has acquired for the Forest Preserve, and a separate issue is the easement lands, which are protected, but they're not protected as wilderness in most cases. But I still thoroughly endorse that. That's terrific. We are not maintaining the resource to the extent that we want because the state doesn't have enough money to do it. I keep reading about people suffering on the Northville Placid Trail, especially the north end of it, where there are blowdowns and wet areas. In some places like that are popular transportation arteries, you can't just say leave everything alone. You need to manage it, and that is prepare certain facilities. I like what they do in Canada. If a lot of people are hiking on that trail, they harden the trail, and they say keep your ass on this trail and don't go off it. I think that's a reasonable thing to do, and I don't know if it's going to be volunteers or state money, which seems in short supply right now, but we are not maintaining our resources. I hike on the North La Placid Trail south of the very north end at least once a week. And I hardly ever see a soul. There's very few people out there. And two, the trail is not maintained. And there are certain places I've gotten kind of tired of going because they are so muddy and the trail is widening and widening. And I'm a purist. I make a point of walking right through the mud in the middle of the trail. And and that gets a little bit tedious after a while. I would like to see that trail hardened because I think that the land itself is suffering by neglect. And that is, well, that's the thing that wilderness managers talk about, I know, a lot, and it takes resources.
Yep. Bill?
Yeah, changing the topic just a little bit. Several years ago, a friend and I were in the Whitney Wilderness around Little Tupper Lake, which, as we know, I'm sure, maybe our listeners don't, has a provenance that veers towards industrial use. So what we now call the William C. Whitney Wilderness Area includes tens of thousands of acres of former timberlands that were logged quite heavily right up before the point of state purchase in the late 90s. So when you go there, if you've been there in the last quarter century since the state bought it, your experience away from the lake would be on substantially built gravel roads, walking through young forests that are now managed as a wilderness area, and as the three of us understand, if allowed over time will grow into something unique. But my friend and I were having a conversation because at the time these effects were still quite visible and raw, and so he asked me the state land master plan and the definition of wilderness, is that description proscriptive or is it descriptive? Meaning, does the wilderness definition define things by negatively saying thou shalt not do this, or should it be describing exactly should it be pristine nature from the beginning?
That's a great discussion you had. I think that's what we need to do. Seems to me, I know that area, and I know those gravel roads that are slowly eroding, and it's kind of brushy and hot in there right now because the canopy hasn't gone up high yet, but it will. I think the definition of wilderness in the state land master plan certainly is aspirational. It's where we're headed, where we want to head. And in 100 years, none of us will be there, but we know that it will be pretty close to what we're thinking about. I used to go camping a lot in the Sewards, which were all logged in the up between about 1890 and 1920 by the Santa Clara Lumber Company. And I found the evidence of that logging, because of its antiquity, always to be sort of interesting and not in violation of my wilderness sympathies. Obviously, I'm being inconsistent there. I'm aware of that. There's a logical gap somewhere in my thinking. But my point is that I think in 100 years, when somebody is wandering around in what I hope will still be the William C. Whitney Wilderness Area and finds a little patch of gravel under the duff, that it will have that sort of archaeological fascination that I used to find in the Sewards, and that it doesn't violate the awe, the sensibility that one can have in a place. We're in the Eastern United States. We have to go along with the idea of rewilding, of recovering places. And I think we're doing that pretty efficiently. The rest of Whitney Park, we need to get our hands on as quickly as possible. And I hope that day will come. I don't have any personal information about what's going on there. I sure would like to know. And there are some other places that we're going to apparently keep the crowds out altogether, like Follansbee Pond. And I can endorse that too. It seems to me like it's a reasonable proposal of what should be done there. I also, by the way, as an aside, I hope the state will declare the Racket River from Long Lake to Axton, in other words, the entire eastern line of the Follansbee Reserve, to be a wild river and get the motors off there.
And as it happens, and you already know this because you're on the board of one of those groups, environmental groups are talking about exactly that. But that's a heavy lift, of course. The same thing, that section of the Racket River should simply be wild and motorless. We can hope. You mentioned Follansbee. We at AWA, I personally think it's a pretty smart arrangement that they've come up with. But our position on that is that we want to see the state purchase it and put it under the aegis of Forever Wild. And those who say that the state doesn't have the means to properly protect it, so let's put it under easement, have a point. But we saw that as the wrong point, that nothing is more important and more powerful than Article 14. And if the state doesn't have the means, then that's where we focus our work. We must find a way for the state to do what it has to do to live up to the letter and spirit of Article 14. Do you have a thought about, I mean, I don't know where you stand on the easement and the decision that was made, but do you have a concern at all that easements are not the same in a fundamental way as protection under Article 14?
Well, every easement is different. You write up a new document every time you create an easement for a particular place, and some of them include recreational rights, some don't. Some include recreational rights for part of the year and not for the rest of the year. Some of them include logging. So, it takes, one hopes, people of goodwill to come together to work out an easement agreement that is appropriate to the place. And whatever I've read about the Follansbee plan sound pretty good to me. I think that allowing the state, the public, into just that kind of vast rolling forest land that is the outside of that preserve is fine. It'll be great for birding and for hiking and for finding solitude, certainly. And the hunters will enjoy it, the few hunters that will actually go into a place like that. And so I think it's a pretty good idea. There is the question about protecting the species of trout in the lake. And we know what happened to Little Tupper. And even the rumor is that certain species were put there intentionally just because it was made into a wilderness area to wipe out the trout fisheries. And I kind of wonder if the planning on Follansbee is being laid out this way in order to deal with the owners of Whitney Park, who say they refuse to sell to the state because of what happened at Little Tupper with the trout population. And that is pure speculation on my part. I have no inside knowledge whatever. Nobody out there talks to me. But the ultimate goal should be state ownership, yes. But I can't see every place. I can't go there's plenty of forest preserve, but I've never laid eyes on or set foot on. And so I got plenty of opportunities to go places. And if the state needs to put a metaphorical fence around certain places to protect a resource, and I can certainly go along with that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We have about 5 minutes left. Bill, other questions?
Well, to wrap up, you've been doing this longer than either Peter or myself, which I say in respect. But what in your time as a wilderness steward, what changes have you observed in your lifetime for both good and bad?
Well, one change that I've experienced is that my own understanding of what wilderness is has certainly changed over time. There's been a lot of scholarship about wilderness, and a lot of scholars have challenged what seems to be a wilderness obsession that some of us has, and I can understand why that might be the case. And I think that meaning our collective consciousness, is getting to an increasingly sophisticated sense of what we're looking for and what wilderness means to us. And as a lifelong educator, I can only say that's a good thing. I think I don't see any negatives in wilderness. I think that even the hostility to wilderness that we've traditionally encountered in this country for decades, if not centuries, is diminishing. I think that there's more sympathy to the idea of wilderness from people who don't even plan to go there. We may have been helped along that by the collapse of the northeastern logging industry in the last few decades. But the negatives, the things that I fear, are all coming from the outside: climate change, species disappearance, invasives, air pollution, things that we or even New York State cannot really control. I expect that if we could all live for 50 years, we might have to adjust our thinking about Article 14. I would do it only under the most dire circumstances. I think that our absolute point on everything is, first step, don't mess with Article 14. But the Adirondack Park is going to change in dramatic ways that we cannot anticipate in the next 50 years, the next 200 years for that matter. We can't plan that far ahead. But for my lifetime, don't mess with Article 14.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to wrap this video cast up. I think we all understand that there are changes beyond our control with which we'll have to contend, but it strikes me, and I'm guessing both of you agree, that the value of protecting the land intrinsically for its natural value, that doesn't have to change. That's what we need to do, and we all value it so terribly much. So, Phil, I look forward to reading your new book. I'm sure Bill does too, and we both thank you from the bottom of our hearts for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to another one someday. Let's make a date in 10 years. Make another one.
Okay, sounds good.
Right.
AWA supporters and listeners, if you find this particular video cast valuable, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments, you can certainly make them where we post this. We welcome donations and we welcome support for our various campaigns. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will talk to all of you down the road. Thanks much.